Greetings. My name is Tyler Miller, a sophomore here at Savannah State University, and today I'll be interviewing Mr. Osby. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
As stated, my name is Dr. Robert Osby. I am an assistant professor at Albany State University. I'm from Albany, Georgia, and my area of concentration is criminal justice. But I do have a PhD in public policy and administration.
Thank you so much. So during this interview, I have four questions I want to ask you, and we can have a conversation about these topics. Is that okay with you?
That's fine.
Okay. So the first question I have is what made 1968 such a turning point in American culture and racial identity?
So I think we have to kind of to fully understand where we met in 1968 in terms of culture and racial identity. I
Mhm.
think we have to first talk about what precipitated that, which was the start of the boost of the real civil rights movement that happened in the early 1960s, which led to several civil rights bills being passed.
Mhm.
And then when we got to 1968, President Johnson had commissioned a group chaired by Mr. Kerner, who did the Kerner report, the Kerner Commission. And that kind of sparked the need for change in terms of civil rights, the culture of recommendation and recommendations that that report made to kind of lead the country in a different direction. And so that's what kind of sparked that. And over the next couple of decades, we saw a lot happen with the civil rights movement. The way that Black people and minority people alike were very interested in civil protections and civil rights and due process. And
Mhm.
so that kind of sparked it along with the legislation that was passed.
Okay, you said something in the beginning of your statement that kind of got my attention. When you said the real civil rights, do you think there was a time where the civil rights wasn't real? I guess you could say it wasn't really impacting us as
Okay, so I mean, if you go to where we are now in society and look at the strides that we made. If you think back into the 60s and the 70s where stuff was desegregated, but yet we were still discriminated against.
right, right.
And then you move now to where we are now in society where we're still seeing areas where people are, I don't know if it's discrimination, but it's
Mhm.
certainly not equal protection or equal rights
Right.
within, especially in the Black and minority communities.
Well, since we're talking about equal rights, and I'm glad you brought that up, it leads me to my next conversation, my next question. How do you think Kerner's idea of, let's say, two nations show the divide between racial groups in America today?
So where we are now with the the idea that we are divided into two nations, that was one of the most famous lines from that commission report,
Mhm.
said that America is heading in a direction where you're living in two nations. And for Black people and minorities
Right.
and other minorities, we are still seeing areas where we're not included, where we are not given afforded the same opportunities,
Right.
whether or not it's in the justice system, which I used to be a police officer and, you know, I policed in Black communities.
Mhm.
And so sometimes in those Black communities, we used to give grace to those who commit crimes because we realize that our white counterparts are not afforded, are not given the same level of justice that maybe a Black person is given for the same amount of crime.
Right.
Um, or if you're looking in a political world and laws that are being made to protect a certain class of people, where we know minorities are grouped into a different bracket. So there we are seeing two different sets of laws applied to two different sets of people.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't know if it's the intention of the government, but I certainly know that from what minorities see is that Black people, when they commit a crime or when Black people go in for a job,
Right.
they don't get the same opportunity or they don't get the same level of justice. So it depends on what you see justice looking at and what nation that you're in, because there are certain Black people are in a higher class or certain minorities in a higher class that certainly believe that we've moved forward and moved past desegregation and moved
Mhm.
past discrimination. And so we have to remind people that everybody's not on the same playing field. And
Right.
so there's where I believe that the two nations come in. Two Nations, it could be class, could be gender, because we're seeing gender equity problems with pay and equal pay for women and men in the workforce, men making more money than women. We're living in a society where we see civil rights applied differently. If you think about the cases of several Black kids that are charged with the same crime, but treated differently in our court system,
Agreed.
especially with the male gender. So.
I can definitely agree with you on that point. As a student that goes to a HBCU, even when it comes to scholarships, internships, or just applying for the job, it has as a black male at HBCU, let me say, I know I have to carry myself to a higher degree than my counterparts than other colors. I know I have to wear a suit and
Absolutely.
tie. I have to talk a certain way. As you know, they like to say your white voice, I guess you could say your corporate voice is a certain way you have to talk and move around just to even put yourself on an equal playing field. And even then, you're still not equal. So I definitely agree on all the points you had there. And then you were saying on how the government may not have done this on purpose, and that led me to my next question on why do you think David say that many white Americans think racism is mostly solved, but us Black Americans disagree?
Well, I think for people that it don't affect,
Hmm.
they believe it's not a problem.
Right.
And so some people believe that racism exists in a world where we want to feel sorry for ourselves.
Right.
And we have to go back to more than 400 years. We didn't ask to come to America. Most of us was brought here on a ship. Um, we have to remember that we did have a Black Wall Street in the United States, and where Black businesses were thriving and making a way, the Black dollar going a long way for a lot of Black people and families that were struggling to make ends meet. And there was a lot of charitable things going on in Black communities as a result. And the success of it happened. Um, a lot of just face it, our white counterparts did not like it. And what did they do? They burn Black Wall Street to the ground.
Yeah.
So it depends on who you ask whether or not we've moved forward from racism. Do we believe that racism still exists? Certainly, it still exists. Do we believe that discrimination still exists? Certainly, it still exists. But there are others who believe that we should stop, the rhetoric and move past what is driving us apart. And that's certainly difficult to do when we have lower class people who are minorities and in the more poverty area, poverty stricken areas of the United States. They don't know where the next meal is coming from. But we have other people who think that McDonald's is a D class meal. Well, there are some poverty stricken people who believe that McDonald's will get them to the next day. So that's and that go back to the America living in two nations. Some people don't believe that poverty exists, and we certainly know that it does.
This is my final question. And do you think younger people see race and identity issues the same way as older people do?
Do I think that the last part of that question?
Do you think the younger generation see race and identity issues the same way the older generation does?
I don't think so. And the reason why I don't think that that's the case is because we've been raised now, the younger generations, especially your generation and a little bit older, been raised to be very inclusive. I
Right.
think that if you look at the makeup of our legislative bodies, there are older people stuck in a certain way.
Yep.
Either they're Black people who have been damaged by the system for so long that they are less trusting of the system, or there are white people who have been indoctrinated with certain principles and standards that they believe to
Mhm.
be true, as for everything, in terms of keeping it in the family, the good old boy system, and things like that.
Mhm.
Younger people are go-getters,
Right.
entrepreneurs. They're ready to take the world by force, ready to make a change, ready for social action. And so now what you're seeing is, especially with like school shootings and things like that, the white kids are banding with the Black kids because they just want to go to school in peace. So while America was moving towards a different, I guess, perspective in terms of seeing, the recommendations of including everybody, more inclusivity, everything from gay marriage to interracial marriage, the right for a woman to choose, and things like that. Those are the cultural things that now forms America. That's sort of things that we vote on now. Those are some of the things that we and there's power in the vote. That's a whole nother subject for a whole nother day. But those are some of the things that drive younger people to the polls. And people, I mean, yeah, the economy is important, right? And immigration topics are important. But younger people just want to be free in society without the threat of gun violence. Younger people just want to be able to use their talents to be an entrepreneur. Younger people want to use their talents to be culture, to be artists, to be, bring back in some of that Renaissance flair. Those are the things that the young people are focused on, while older communities are focused on keeping it the way it has always been.
And I understand that. I can definitely say, speaking from my generation growing up, it felt more of like I knew we were separated, but it never felt as if we were separated. So growing up, I played baseball. I was the only black guy on my team. I knew I was on the team, it felt like a family, but I also knew we lived lives totally different ways. But I think my generation, we never really looked at race as much as an issue as the older generation does.
And if you think of what even younger people, I guess we're not too many years removed from when proms were separate, where black kids would go to one prom and a white kid would go to another. Those are some of the racial, cultural things that the younger communities have said, hold on. The young kids are saying, wait, we live in 2025 now. We live in 2024 now. We don't want to go to the prom without our friends. Exactly. And our friends happen to be black. And so we need to go to the prom together, I
think social media has played a big part of that too in the generations. So I know back in the days, it was kind of more of a word of mouth thing. So it's like, you're not even going to risk having those conversations. But I think now what social media is, you don't know who's behind the screen. So
right.
I can put my ideas out here, we're all agreeing, we're all the same color. And social media has brought us and networked us together more than the older generation. So I think that's a big role to it.
Absolutely. Because you look at stuff like TikTok and we were talking about the culture difference. Think about in the 60s, not every household had a phone, right? And so now people, you move into the 80s where you start seeing people on television that kind of look like us. And then you move into the 90s and now they're putting comedy with it, and other races are combining and making movies together and really enjoying stuff. And that's what the American dream should be about. We move to a different paradigm where people saying we don't too much. I mean, we know racial biases exist, but we can still live in America now. This is 2025. We can still live in America. We can still be free, live the American dream, and be happy.
All of my interview topics, I appreciate you, and I appreciate you for giving me your time and having this interview. And I want to say thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.